The man known as Logan had lived through more pain than any human being should ever have to endure. Wars that spanned continents and decades. Experiments that stripped away his memories and replaced them with nightmares. Battles against enemies who should have killed him 1,000 times over. Through all of it, his body healed. His bones held. His claws cut through whatever stood in his way. That was the life of Wolverine, and he had made peace with it long ago. But this was different. It started as nothing more than a dull ache in his forearm. The kind of sensation most people would ignore. The way you ignore a bruise or a muscle that twinged after sleeping wrong. For a man like Logan, pain was simply part of existing. It lived in the background of every moment, a constant companion that reminded him he was still alive. He had learned to tune it out the way city dwellers learn to ignore traffic noise. It was always there, but it didn't matter. Except this time, it did matter. The ache didn't fade like wounds usually faded. It didn't sharpen into something his healing factor could identify and repair. Instead, it sat there deep in the bone, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. Like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Like something buried in his skeleton was slowly waking from a very long sleep. Every time he extended his claws, the sensation intensified. Not the familiar burn of adamantium sliding through flesh. Not the clean pain he had grown accustomed to over decades of fighting. This was something colder. Something that felt ancient in a way he couldn't explain. It traveled up his arms like electricity moving through frozen water. And when the claws retracted, the feeling lingered far longer than it should have. His healing factor responded the way it always responded to threats. It attacked. It tried to suppress whatever was causing the disturbance, tried to isolate it and neutralize it the way it neutralized poisons and infections and cellular damage. But this time, the healing factor's response only made things worse. The more his body fought against the sensation, the stronger it became, like pushing against a door that pushed back harder with every shove. Logan started noticing changes he couldn't ignore. His claws felt heavier when they emerged, as if the metal itself had gained mass. His hands trembled slightly after fights, a microscopic shake that lasted only seconds but shouldn't have happened at all. A man with his healing factor didn't get tremors. A man with his experience didn't lose control of his own muscles, not even for a moment. And then there was the sound. When he was alone, when the world went quiet and there was nothing to distract him, he could hear it. A low hum that seemed to come from inside his own skull. Not voices. Nothing so clear as words or language. Just a vibration, steady and persistent, like metal grinding against something that wasn't quite memory, but wasn't quite anything else either. It reminded him of the way old machines sounded when they started up after years of disuse. The groan of parts that had forgotten how to move. The protest of systems that had been dormant too long. His instincts, honed by more years of survival than he could accurately count, were screaming at him. Something was wrong. Something was inside him that didn't belong there. Not a weapon someone had planted. Not a tracking device or a bomb or any of the dozen things enemies had tried to hide in his body over the years. This was different. This was older. This had been there longer than he wanted to admit. He went to Beast because Beast was the only person he trusted to look without asking too many questions. The blue-furred scientist ran every scan in his considerable arsenal, checked every frequency, examined every layer of tissue and bone and metal that made up Wolverine's enhanced skeleton. The initial results came back exactly as expected. Adamantium lacing intact. Healing factor functioning within normal parameters. No foreign objects detected. No anomalies worth noting. But Beast kept looking, because Beast was thorough, and because something in Logan's eyes told him that normal results weren't going to be enough this time. That's when the readings started getting strange. Deep beneath the adamantium coating, buried in the marrow of one of Logan's bones, the scanners detected something they couldn't identify. Not metal, not organic tissue, not mutant energy or technological implant, or anything else in the database of known materials. It existed in a space between categories, refusing to be classified, refusing to be understood. And it was moving, not quickly, not aggressively, but definitely unmistakably moving, shifting position within the bone like something turning over in its sleep, like something that had been still for a very long time and was finally starting to remember how to be awake. Logan didn't tell anyone else what Beast had found. Not Jean, whose psychic abilities might have helped him understand what was happening. Not Xavier, whose vast experience with the unknown might have provided guidance. Not Storm, whose steady presence had anchored him through countless crises. He kept the information to himself because keeping things to himself was what he did. Because sharing his problems meant making them other people's problems. And he had spent too many years watching people get hurt trying to help him. But there was another reason he stayed silent. A reason that lived in the deepest part of his mind, in the place where instinct and memory blurred together into something that felt almost like prophecy. He already knew. Whatever was inside him, whatever was waking up after years of dormancy, it had been there since the beginning. Since the needles and the tanks and the screaming. Since the day they poured molten adamantium into his bones and turned him from a man into something else entirely. The thing in his skeleton wasn't an accident or an afterthought. It was deliberate. It was planned. And it had been waiting for this moment since before he could remember. The pain in his arm was just the first warning. The tremors and the humming and the weight in his claws were just the opening notes of a symphony that had been building for decades. Something was coming. Something was changing. And Logan was right at the center of it, whether he wanted to be or not. He sat alone in his room that night, listening to the sound that only he could hear, feeling the pulse that only he could feel. Outside, the world continued on as it always did. The X-Men trained and planned and prepared for threats they could see coming. But inside Logan's body, in the spaces between metal and bone, something ancient was stirring. And it wasn't going back to sleep. To understand what was happening to Wolverine, you had to go back to the place where he was made. Back to the sterile corridors and reinforced chambers of Weapon X. Back to the program that took a dangerous mutant and transformed him into something far more dangerous. Everyone who knew anything about Logan knew the basic story. The capture, the experiments, the adamantium bonding process that should have killed him but didn't because his healing factor was stronger than anyone had anticipated. They knew he emerged from those tanks as a living weapon, nearly indestructible, capable of cutting through almost anything with the claws that had become his signature. What they didn't know was that Weapon X had never been just about creating a super soldier. The scientists and military officials who ran the program had ambitions that went far beyond simple combat effectiveness. They wanted to build something that could survive any environment, any attack, any threat that the world might throw at it. They wanted a weapon that would never break down, never wear out, never need to be replaced. But more than that, they wanted control. Absolute, unquestionable control over a being powerful enough to change the course of wars. To achieve that control, they tried things that went far beyond standard experimentation. There were files buried in the deepest vaults of Department K's database, records sealed with encryption so heavy that even most high-ranking officials never knew they existed. One of those files bore a simple label that gave no indication of its true significance. Omega Code. The contents of that file described technologies and materials that didn't come from Earth. They detailed experiments conducted on artifacts recovered from sites that official records claimed didn't exist. They outlined a project so secret that even the scientists directly involved were kept compartmentalized, each one knowing only their small piece of a much larger puzzle. Weapon X had help from outside the planet. That was a truth that nobody talked about, the secret buried so deep that even Logan himself had never uncovered it despite years of searching for answers about his past. The Omega Code project centered on an artifact recovered from a crashed vessel of unknown origin. The ship had been found decades before Logan's transformation, its hull bearing markings that didn't match any known language or design philosophy. Inside, among the wreckage and the bodies of beings that were definitely not human, the recovery team found something that defied every attempt at classification. It looked like a blade, At least, that was the closest human concept that applied to its shape and apparent function. But it wasn't metal. It wasn't crystal. It wasn't any material that Earth's science could identify or replicate. When researchers tried to examine it, the blade seemed to examine them back. When they attempted to take samples, the material resisted in ways that suggested awareness. When they ran it through every analytical device available, the results came back contradictory and impossible. The blade was alive. Not in the biological sense, not with cells and metabolism and the chemical processes that defined earthly life, but alive nonetheless, aware, responsive, and according to the fragments of data recovered from the crashed ship's computer systems, incredibly dangerous. The beings who had carried the blade had used it as more than a weapon. It was a bonding tool, something that merged with its wielder at the molecular level, sharing memories and capabilities and consciousness itself. In the right hands, it could cut through anything physical and quite a few things that weren't. In the wrong hands, it could destroy worlds. The Weapon X scientists couldn't make it work. Every attempt to bond the blade with a human subject ended in failure. Sometimes the failure was quick, the subject dying within minutes, as their body rejected the foreign material. Sometimes it was slow, the blade burning through its host over days or weeks, consuming them from the inside as it searched for something it couldn't find. Mutants fared no better. Enhanced soldiers, genetic experiments, psychic operatives, they all failed the same way. The blade was too much for any human system to contain. But the scientists didn't give up. They never gave up. They simply changed their approach. If they couldn't bond the blade to a host, they reasoned perhaps they could contain it inside one. Hide it away in a biological vault strong enough to keep it dormant indefinitely. Lock it in a prison of flesh and bone until they figured out how to make it useful. They needed someone whose body could withstand anything. Someone whose healing factor could suppress the blade's attempts to activate or escape. Someone strong enough to survive the bonding process, even if the blade couldn't fully integrate. They needed Logan. The Adamantium bonding procedure was brutal enough on its own. What the records didn't show, what Logan himself never knew, was that the process included an additional step. While his skeleton was being coated with indestructible metal, while his body was being transformed into the ultimate weapon, the scientists placed something else inside his bones. They buried the Omega Code blade in Logan's marrow, not to activate it, not to give him its power, just to hide it, to seal it away inside the strongest biological container they could create. They coated it with adamantium along with everything else, trapping it in a prison within a prison. Logan's healing factor, they believed, would keep the blade dormant. His body would suppress it like an immune system suppressing a virus. The blade would sleep forever, locked away inside a man who would never know it was there. For decades, their plan worked. Logan lived his life, fought his battles, died, and came back more times than anyone could count. Through all of it, the blade remained silent. No activation, no attempts to integrate, no sign that it was anything more than an inert piece of alien material, forgotten and irrelevant. But the scientists had made a mistake. They assumed the blade was simply a weapon waiting to be used. They didn't understand that it was something far more complex, something patient, something that could wait for the right moment, because it had been waiting for the right moment since before humanity existed. And now, after all those years of silence, something had changed. Something had triggered the blade's awakening. The dormant artifact was stirring, reaching out, preparing to fulfill a purpose that the Weapon X scientists never could have imagined. The pain in Logan's arm was just the beginning. The humming in his bones was the blade remembering what it was. The weight in his claws was his body adjusting to something it had carried unknowingly for decades. Weapon X had never told him the full truth about what they did to him. They couldn't, because they didn't understand the truth themselves. They thought they were hiding a weapon. In reality, they were planting a seed, and that seed was finally ready to grow. The blade that lived inside Wolverine's bones was not something that could be explained in human terms. It was not technology in any sense that Earth's science could comprehend. It was not a weapon the way swords and guns were weapons. It existed in a category all its own, a fusion of material and consciousness that had been created by beings who understood the universe in ways humanity was still billions of years away from grasping. The Omega Code blade was grown, not built, cultivated over centuries by a species that had long since passed from the physical universe, leaving behind only their weapons and their warnings. These beings had believed that blades should have memory, that a weapon worthy of the name should learn from every battle it fought, remember every enemy it faced, carry the wisdom of every warrior who wielded it. They created their blades not as tools, but as companions, partners in the endless wars that shaped the early cosmos. Each blade bonded with its wielder at levels far deeper than physical contact. It merged with their nervous system, their emotional state, their very sense of self. When that wielder died, the blade sealed away everything they had been, their memories, their skills, their understanding of combat and sacrifice and duty. Then it waited, patient as stone, silent as the space between stars, until it found someone new. The blade inside Logan had been carried by dozens of warriors before him. It remembered battles fought under alien suns, wars waged for causes that had been forgotten before Earth's first fish crawled onto land. It held the accumulated wisdom of beings who had spent their entire existence learning how to fight, how to protect, how to stand against darkness when everything else had fallen. But it also remembered the cost. Every one of its previous hosts had paid a price for carrying it. Some had given their lives. Others had given more than that. The blade didn't promise victory to those who wielded it. It only promised purpose. And purpose, in the wars the blade had been created to fight, often meant sacrifice. The visions started coming to Logan without warning. He would be in the middle of something ordinary, eating breakfast or walking through the mansion's grounds. And suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. He was somewhere else entirely, standing on battlefields that existed light years away and thousands of years ago, watching wars unfold between species he had no names for, feeling the weight of weapons he had never held and the loss of comrades he had never known. The visions weren't random. The blade was showing him its history, teaching him what it meant to carry something so old and so powerful. Each memory that flooded through his mind added another layer to his understanding. Each battle he witnessed from the perspective of warriors long dead showed him what they had faced and how they had responded. They had fought against darkness, not metaphorical darkness, not the darkness of evil intentions or corrupt hearts. Real darkness, a force that existed in the spaces between galaxies, in the emptiness that separated stars. Something that wanted nothing except nothing, that consumed not out of hunger or desire, but simply because consumption was its nature. The blade had been created to fight that darkness. It was one of many weapons forged for a war that had nearly ended the universe before the universe had properly begun. And somehow, impossibly, it had survived long enough to find its way into the bones of a mutant who had never asked to be chosen for anything. Logan's body was changing in ways he couldn't control and could barely understand. The blade was no longer content to sleep. It was integrating, merging with his systems, rewriting parts of him that his healing factor had always kept exactly the same. He could feel it happening, feel the foreign presence spreading through his skeleton like roots growing through soil. His healing factor fought back. It always fought back. That was what it did, what it was designed to do. But the blade wasn't an infection or an injury. It wasn't something that could be isolated and destroyed. It was becoming part of him, and his body's attempts to reject it only seemed to accelerate the process. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between visions, Logan could almost sense the blade's awareness, not as a voice or a presence he could communicate with, but as a feeling, a weight of attention, like being watched by something so old and so patient that watching was all it knew how to do. The blade was evaluating him, judging whether he was worthy of carrying it forward, learning his strengths and his weaknesses, his courage and his fears. It had done this before, with every host it had ever chosen. Some had passed its evaluation, others had not. Logan didn't know what happened to those who failed. The blade's memories didn't include that information, but he could guess. A weapon this powerful wouldn't simply let go of an unsuitable host. It would remove them and move on, find someone else, try again. He wondered how much time he had, how long before the blade decided whether he measured up to the warriors who had carried it before, how long before it either accepted him fully or burned through him the way it had burned through all those test subjects decades ago. The answer came in another vision, more vivid than the others, more immediate. He saw the blade not as it existed now, wrapped around his bones like a sleeping serpent, but as it was meant to be, fully awakened, fully integrated, a weapon of light and shadow that could cut through anything that existed and quite a few things that didn't. And he saw himself holding it, not the him that existed now, confused and in pain and struggling to understand what was happening. A different him, stronger, clearer, changed in ways that went far beyond the physical. The blade wasn't trying to destroy him. It was trying to transform him, to make him into something worthy of the weapon it had always been. The question was whether he could survive the transformation, or whether he even wanted to. The mission that changed everything started like any other mission. A young mutant had gone missing. Telos, they called him. A speedster with more attitude than common sense. Always pushing boundaries. Always getting into situations he couldn't handle alone. He'd been investigating something that crashed from orbit. A piece of alien technology that had impacted in the wilderness far from any population center. SWRD had flagged it for investigation, but hadn't sent anyone yet. Telos, being Telos, decided not to wait. That was 3 days ago. Nobody had heard from him since. Logan found the crash site easily enough. The impact had left a crater visible from miles away, the surrounding forest flattened by the force of whatever had come down. The technology at the center of the crater was like nothing he had ever seen, even after all his years of dealing with alien threats. Dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Surfaces covered in markings that hurt to look at directly. A sense of wrongness that his instincts recognized even if his conscious mind couldn't explain. He found Telos at the edge of the crater, or what was left of him. The young mutant wasn't burned or crushed or torn apart. He was simply empty. Every trace of energy that had made him alive, every spark of the speed force that had powered his abilities, every bit of vitality that separated a living being from a corpse. All of it was gone, drained away so completely that even the cells of his body seemed dimmer than they should have been. Logan reached down to lift the body, to bring Telos home for a proper burial at least. And that's when it happened. Pain exploded through his arm. Not the dull ache he had been living with for weeks. Not the tremors or the weight or any of the symptoms he had learned to manage. This was something else entirely. A pressure so intense it felt like his bones were trying to tear themselves apart from the inside. His claws extended without his permission. His vision blurred and then shifted, colors bleeding into frequencies he had never seen before. The humming that had lived in the background of his awareness surged forward, so loud now that it drowned out everything else. And then the memories came. Not his memories, the blade's memories. He saw a battlefield under a sky that held 3 suns, 2 of them dying. Bodies everywhere, beings of a dozen different species, all of them fallen in defense of something he couldn't quite make out. At the center of the carnage stood a figure, tall, armored in material that looked like it had been grown rather than forged, carrying a blade that burned with light that wasn't light. The blade inside him, the same blade seen from outside, wielded by the warrior who had carried it before its long journey to Earth. The warrior was dying. Logan could feel it, could sense the life draining out of them, even as they fought to remain standing. But they weren't fighting for themselves. They were fighting to protect something behind them, something that mattered more than their own survival. The vision shifted, changed, showed him things that came before and things that came after. The blade passing from host to host across millennia. The wars it had fought and the prices it had paid. The darkness it had been created to oppose and the cost of opposing something that could never truly be destroyed. When the vision released him, Logan was on his knees in the crater, his claws buried in the dirt, his breath coming in ragged gasps that his healing factor was struggling to smooth out. The humming had subsided, but hadn't stopped. The blade was still awake, still watching, still waiting to see what he would do next. He looked at Telos's body and understood something he hadn't understood before. The young mutant hadn't been killed by the crash or the technology it contained. He had been drained by something that had been waiting for someone to investigate. Something that fed on life energy. Something connected to the darkness the blade had shown him. And by coming here, by getting close enough to trigger the blade's awakening, Logan had done exactly what that something wanted. He had announced himself. The blade inside him wasn't just waking up anymore. It was preparing, arming itself, getting ready for a fight that had been coming since before Earth existed. And somewhere out in the darkness between stars, something had heard its activation. Something old, something hungry, something that had been waiting almost as long as the blade itself. The war the blade was made for was coming to Earth, and Logan was standing right at the center of it. He carried Telos's body back to the mansion in silence. The X-Men gathered around, their faces showing the mixture of grief and anger that always accompanied the death of one of their own. But Logan barely registered their presence. His mind was still processing what the blade had shown him, still trying to understand what it meant and what he was supposed to do about it. Xavier tried to reach him. The telepath's mental touch was gentle, careful, the way it always was when he was dealing with Logan's natural resistance to psychic intrusion. But this time, something blocked him completely. Not Logan's usual mental defenses. Something else. Something that recognized Xavier's probe and deflected it without apparent effort. The blade was protecting itself, protecting its host, keeping its secrets until it decided they were ready to be shared. Xavier's expression shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. In all his years of knowing Logan, of working with him through countless crises, he had never encountered anything that could block his telepathy so completely. The only beings capable of that kind of defense were cosmic entities, Omega-level threats, things that existed on a scale far beyond anything the X-Men normally dealt with. Logan saw the question in Xavier's eyes and had no answer to give him. He didn't understand what was happening any better than anyone else. He only knew that something inside him had changed. Something that had been sleeping for decades was now awake and aware and very, very old. That night, alone in his room, he made a decision. He needed to know what was inside him, needed to see it for himself, not through visions or memories or scans that couldn't make sense of what they were detecting. He needed to look at it directly, whatever it was, whatever the cost of looking might be. He sat on the floor in the darkness, extended his claws, and slowly, methodically, with the kind of control that only decades of practice could provide, he began to cut into his own arm, through skin, through muscle, through the adamantium coating that should have been impervious to anything except the claws themselves. Layer by layer, he opened himself up, his healing factor fighting to close wounds that he kept making, his body screaming at him to stop even as he pushed deeper. And then he found it, the blade. Not like his claws, not like the adamantium that coated his bones. Something else entirely. A ribbon of darkness shot through with light, wrapped around his bone like a sleeping serpent, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, but wasn't quite the same. The moment the air touched it, the moment it was exposed to something outside the prison of his flesh, the blade reacted. It shimmered, it shifted, and for just an instant, it seemed to look at him. Not with eyes. The blade didn't have eyes, but with attention, with awareness, with a consciousness so old and so patient that it made his own centuries of life feel like a single breath. And then the memories came again, but this time they were for him, not visions of ancient wars or fallen warriors. These memories were personal, direct, a message from the blade to the man who carried it. It showed him what it was. A key, a weapon designed not just to fight, but to lock and unlock, created in a war against something that couldn't be killed, but could be imprisoned. forged from materials that existed only in the spaces between dimensions, in the cracks where reality met unreality. It showed him what it was meant to open. A prison built from dying stars, floating in a part of space so far from Earth that light from its nearest neighbor would take 1,000,000 years to arrive. Inside that prison, sealed away by the sacrifice of countless warriors across countless millennia, was something called only the Hollow. The blade didn't describe the Hollow in terms Logan could fully comprehend. There were no words for what it was, no concepts that human minds were designed to grasp. But it showed him feelings, impressions, the weight of absolute emptiness, the hunger that wasn't hunger because hunger implied desire, the darkness that wasn't darkness because darkness implied the absence of light. The Hollow was the absence of everything, a wound in reality itself, something that existed only to unexist everything else. And the blade in Logan's bones was the key to its prison, not the only key. Once there had been many blades, many carriers, many warriors standing guard over the seals that kept the Hollow contained. But time and war and the endless patience of their enemy had reduced those numbers. One by one, the guardians had fallen. One by one, the blades had been lost or destroyed or hidden away by desperate survivors, hoping to preserve something for future generations. Now only one remained. The blade inside Logan was the last key, the final piece of a lock that had been holding for longer than human civilization had existed. If it fell, if it was destroyed or corrupted or claimed by the wrong hands, the prison would open, and the Hollow would be free. Logan understood then why the blade had been placed inside him. Not just because his healing factor could contain it. Not just because Weapon X needed somewhere to hide their stolen alien artifact. But because, on some level that even the scientists couldn't have understood, the blade had chosen him. It recognized something in Logan, some quality that made him suitable for the burden it carried. Maybe it was his stubbornness, his refusal to stay dead no matter how many times the universe tried to kill him. Maybe it was his capacity for pain, his ability to absorb suffering that would have broken anyone else. Maybe it was simply that he had lived long enough, lost enough, endured enough to understand what sacrifice really meant. Whatever the reason, the blade had decided that Logan was worthy of carrying it. Now it was showing him what that meant. The arm healed around the blade as his healing factor reasserted itself. The flesh closed over, the adamantium sealed, and the ribbon of alien metal disappeared back into the prison of his bones. But Logan could still feel it now, not as pain or pressure, but as presence, a companion, a weapon waiting to be used. He sat in the darkness for a long time after that, thinking about what he had learned and what it meant for his future. The X-Men, Earth, the universe itself, all of it was at risk now. And he was the only thing standing between everything and nothing. He had never asked for this, had never wanted to be chosen for anything except to be left alone. But the blade didn't care about what he wanted. It cared about what was necessary. And what was necessary, now that the blade was awake and the Hollow was stirring, was a warrior who would never stop fighting. Logan looked at his hands in the darkness, the same hands that had killed more people than he could count. The same hands that had held friends as they died and enemies as he ended them. The same hands that had built and destroyed and healed and hurt across more years than any human being was meant to experience. Now they would carry a weapon older than Earth. Now they would fight a war that had started before humanity existed. Now they would either save everything or lose everything. And Logan, being Logan, simply nodded and accepted what was coming. Because that's what he did. That's what he had always done. He endured.